Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our RN and Allied Health lecture centered around the pivotal role of nursing in clinical trials. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. Before we get started, I want to let you know if you have any problems with your connection, either video or audio, during the lecture, you can send an email to unccn@unc.edu. Or you can call or text the number 919-445-1000. Also for today's lecture, for question and answer and polling, we'll be using a software called Poll Everywhere. And in order to participate in that poll, you'll be able to use your mobile phone, and you will need to text the letters UNCCN to the number 22333, and I'll post that information again in just a second. Also to let you know that we do have a presence on Facebook and Twitter, so if you're currently not a follower or you currently haven't liked us, we'd encourage you to do so. We do post information about our upcoming events to both of those social media platforms. So just a second ago, I did speak about our use of Poll Everywhere. We would like for you to participate in Poll Everywhere with us today if possible. If you have a computer in front of you, you can go to pollev.com/UNCCN to join in using Poll Everywhere. Or if you have a mobile device that allows you to send a text message, you can text the letters UNCCN to the numbers 22333, and that will allow you to get into our polls for today. We will also use this software for question and answer at the end of our lecture. And our first poll for today is, do you work with patients who are participating or considering participating in a clinical trial? So if you could let us know yes if you do by texting the letter A, no is texting the letter B, or if you're not quite sure, text in the letter C. And we'll revisit those poll results in just a second. So today for our lecture, we're delighted to have with us Kim Keller, who is the Assistant Director of the Clinical and Network Operations in the Clinical Protocol Office at Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center here at UNC Chapel Hill. Within that role, she works in the CPO and is responsible for patient and study coordination related activities that include registration, toxicity assessments, and safety monitoring of new therapeutics, as well as patient education. Kim, we're delighted to have you here with us today, and we thank you for being here to present information about clinical trials and the roles nurses can play.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me. That's great.
So, would you mind telling us a little bit before we get started how you came to the role that you're currently in, kind of your trajectory?
So, I've been a nurse for 31 years and spent 25 of those years in oncology taking care of patients in some way or another. It started out as an inpatient nurse working in oncology. I've done nurse management on the inpatient side. I've had some opportunity to take care of oncology patients on the home health and infusion therapy. And then about 11 and a half years ago, I accidentally stumbled into this research role. I responded to a job opening at Lineberger on their website. Thankfully, I got the job offer because when I went in, I didn't even know what the role was. I actually asked the person interviewing me what this role was and what would I be doing, because I really did not have any idea. So I love what I do. I think this is a really interesting and exciting role, and I see it's a great way to help patients in a different way.
Okay, wow. And I'm sure your broad range of experience really is an asset to the organization because you ultimately work with patients in your work.
Right, and I hope that with my experience as a staff nurse as well, that I can convey today how important it is to collaborate on both sides to take care of our patients.
Okay. All right, well with that, let's take a look back at our poll and see if we've gotten any responses so far to learn a little bit about our audience. So it looks like of all those that have responded, everyone works with either patients who are participating in or considering participating in a clinical trial. So thanks to those of you who did respond. So with that, I'm going to turn the controls over to Kim.
Thank you.
And let her take it from there.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I have to say that I know that it can be really busy and difficult to get away from a busy clinic or a busy inpatient unit to sit for an hour and listen to someone talk about any topic. But I'm hoping that that this is going to be really interesting for you, and that you're going to be able to help understand how important your role is in taking care of our patients that are on clinical trials. So thanks for listening in. I'm going to start with just my objectives. I really want to just share how important clinical trials are for our patients, and what that opportunities are available to our patients. And then again, how you can help them if they're interested in a trial, how you can help them identify those trials that they might be interested in, help them talk to care providers about their interest, and then if they're on a trial, actually what you can do to help us be our eyes and our ears and help us keep our patients safe while protecting the data of the study. So let's start with some statistics. This is just some interesting facts that I found on the NCI website. When you look at, this was from 2016, they did not have 2017 information up when I looked, but in 2016 it was estimated that over 1.6 million patients were going to be diagnosed with a new diagnosis of cancer, and over 500,000 people were going to die from their disease. Children, really impactful numbers. The most recent information they had for pediatrics was from 2014, but over 15,000 children were going to be diagnosed, with close to 2,000 dying from their disease. As depressing as that is, the good news is that the number of survivors continues to go up. If you look at the number in 2014, you were looking at 14.5 million, and by 2024 it's expected to be up to 19 million. Yeah, unfortunate thing is when you think about looking at your family, you look around the room, you look at your friends and your colleagues, the incidence and chance of somebody being diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime is around 40%. So you're looking at a 4 in 10 or a 2 in 5 chance of, at some point, being told that you or a family member has cancer. Again, some good news. We are seeing a decline in the death rate over time in both children and adults, which is great news, and I think that it's related to the use of better drugs, and clinical trials as it played a part in that. So this is really good to see. I've listed the top 10 cancers, or the top cancers for the 2009 to 2013 that were available to me on the NCI website, and then the top cancers for men and women, which for anybody living in North Carolina, I think these are probably not a surprise to you. Prostate and breast for men and women, and then lung and colon for both men and women were the top 3 prevalent types. From a clinical trial perspective, this is where you can really be helpful to your patients. Only about 3 to 5% of cancer patients participate in clinical trials. And when you look at the number of patients that are being diagnosed every year, and the patients that are survivors that are walking around with advanced disease, that's a really small number. And I would love to think that we could expand that and allow our patients more access to more treatments sooner. And again, it's a really helpful thing for you to know how you can help your patients find that information in a trial that's specific for them. And looking at the numbers of patients that enroll to a trial, we have to set accrual goals that are realistic. But sometimes even with the realistic numbers that we set, we can have a trial that's open for a number of years and only put 1 or 2 patients on it. And from a cost perspective, it's just not feasible to continue to keep those trials open. So what we find is we have a lot of trials over time that have to close just because of poor enrollment. It might not be through anybody's, just lack of effort, but it's more likely that there's a patient, there's some reasons patients don't want to participate, but it could also be that it's just the patient populations that you're seeing in your facility at that time are not the patients that could go on to these trials. But it is important, I think, to think about that as you're seeing patients. It takes a long time to get drugs to market, and so the longer we have trials sitting open, the longer it is before we can get the really good drugs, the ones that are showing efficacy, out to our patients. And of course, the cost of cancer care keeps going up. Nationally, it was almost $125 billion in 2010, and that's going to go up to $156 billion by 2020. So that is a lot of financial risk for our patients, and it's detrimental. So it's really important that we try to keep on task and on track and enroll and keep our trials open for a shorter periods of time, get the quality data that we need so that we can keep moving forward. I mentioned the small number of patients that participate in studies, and one of them is there was a study done to find out some of the barriers, and I've listed those here along with the article information below. Patients have a lot of reasons for not wanting to participate, and some of it is just fear. They're afraid that these trials are going to make them sick. My cancer makes me sick. The drugs might make me sicker. I don't want to have decreased quality of life. What if I get a placebo? How do I know that you're telling me the truth when you say that I'm not going to get a placebo, that I'm going to get the real drug? And then there's also the cost that's involved, and that's also a concern. And then on top of that is, what if this cancer drug that's a treatment trial we don't really have a lot of information on, what if it's not going to work? And maybe I could have taken something that's already approved that would have done better. I worked as a phase 1 research nurse for 7 years before I moved into a leadership role, and I heard a lot from patients say that the reason we're asking them to participate is because there's no hope, or I'm a guinea pig, and they really are afraid that the reason we're saying this is, well, we might as well experiment on them because there's nothing else that we can do for them, so let's just see what we can learn, and that's not the case. There's a lot of preclinical work up front that we have to do for a patient to make sure that it's safe for them to be put on a study. And so we want our patients to understand and feel that they can trust us when we say that we're not doing this because this is their only chance. The way to do that is to really, first of all, for yourself, be familiar with the clinical trials, just basics that you can help share with your patients. For study coordinators that are first being introduced to a patient, they may have already developed a long-lasting, trusting relationship with you over a course of months or even years. And so if we come into the room and we talk to them about a clinical trial, they may, when you walk back into the room behind us, they may ask you some questions, and so it's really helpful for you as a healthcare provider that they know and trust to be able to maybe help them understand anything that they were afraid to ask and get clarification on when we were talking to them. So it's just about knowing the basics. You don't have to understand the trial. It's about understanding just clinical trial basics. If they have concerns, encourage them to talk about them to you or to call us back and talk to the patients or their providers. Assure them that when they are talking to us and working with us and we're consenting them on the trial, they're going to have lots of opportunities to ask questions, and that they should write any questions down that they're afraid they're going to forget and bring them with them when they come back to the clinic to talk to us. Absolutely encourage them that they should have all of their questions answered before they agree to go forward on a clinical trial. So just, if your patient says, well, what is a clinical trial? What does that mean? It's really simple. It's just a research study that involves humans. These trials are meant to prevent, diagnose, treat, or help manage symptoms of cancer. There are 2 kinds of trials. There's interventional and observational, and they're divided into 4 phases. Interventional trials are pretty, I think, what you would expect. You're going to give the patient a drug and see how that works for them. Observational can actually mean watching the benefits or how patients do on something. So, for example, you have a patient population that's maybe being treated for breast cancer, and they're going to get a standard therapy, and maybe you're wanting to study the effects of exercise. So you might look at patients, maybe give them a questionnaire. How often do you exercise? What's your physical activity level? And to see if there's a way to kind of pull out information on maybe quality of life or how well they tolerate treatments based on that. That's more of an observational trial. You're not really doing anything to intervene. You're just observing. So it's really important that patients understand that clinical trials are completely voluntary. I've had patients that are worried about telling their doctor no. The doctor comes into the room and says, I've got this here are all of your options, and then there's also this clinical trial I'd like to talk to you about. They absolutely have every right to say, no, I don't want to do it, and they have to feel okay saying that. It's important that they understand that this is voluntary, and even if they sign up to participate in the study, no matter where we are in the study, they can be still in the screening phase, which is before they get started on treatment, or they could be well into their treatment. Whenever they decide that they don't want to do this anymore, if they have a reason and they say, I want to stop, then we stop. And they need to understand that if they decide to withdraw, it's not going to impact their relationship with their doctors. We really are trying to do what's best for them. We also practice under what we call GCP, Good Clinical Practice, and there are some FDA-established guidelines that require that we do things a certain way to protect our patients, so that the patients have rights, and we're going to make sure that we do no harm to them. And then for international studies, we've also got the International Conference on Harmonization. So we have some internationally accepted standards that allow patients to assure them that they are protected and that their rights are going to be protected, and that the data we're looking to collect is good quality data that can be reproducible and benefit them. You know, at the local level, all of our studies are also reviewed. So if they're worried about, you know, this doctor wants to open a study and they aren't so sure that it's the right thing, and what if I'm going to get hurt, or how do I know that you're not really just using me as a guinea pig? The other thing to know is that there are protections in place before the study even opens. We have here at UNC a protocol review committee. This is a scientific panel that really looks at the scientific rationale, and they want to make sure that the science is good and solid, and that we're not just doing this randomly. So this is we want to make sure the patients understand that they are looking at this from a safety perspective. Any study that's funded by the government goes through this process, and at UNC all treatment trials are also reviewed. We also have something called a Data Safety and Monitoring Board, and a lot of sites that have that are opening clinical trials have some kind of board where they look at the study as well, and they review the study as it's ongoing. Here at UNC, those are reviewed to make sure that we're following the study, that we're in compliance with all of the requirements of the study, that patients aren't getting harmed, and they look at, are there any safety concerns on the study, so that if they feel there are, they can ask that the study be placed on hold while further information is gathered. So it's to ensure that patients, again, are protected and they can feel okay about going on a study. There's also institutional review boards. Federal rules require a certain number of people sit on the IRB. They review each trial before it's opened, and they also look at these annually. They want to make sure, again, that we're following what we're supposed to be doing, and if they have concerns, they can insist that we put the trial on hold before and provide more information. If they have any concerns about the way we're operating and maybe there's something that's missing in the study that we've been missing, like a data point, they can ask us for a corrective action plan before they'll let us reopen. So these studies are vetted, and there's a lot of steps on the front and throughout the life of the study to ensure that patients are protected as well as the data quality. Before anything is done for a patient on a clinical trial, we do look at the informed consent process. We give our patients the consents, and we really discourage patients from signing it the first time they see it. We want them to have time to kind of think about this. We want to make sure that they understand in detail not only the study and the side effects, but also the schedule, the visit schedule. We could be asking our patients to come in and spend 42 days in the hospital, or we might be asking them to come in and spend a week coming and going in the infusion clinic for treatments and blood draws. So we want them to be clear on everything. The consents will talk to them about the purpose and the goals of the study. For example, a phase 1 trial, we hope the patients benefit, but that's not going to be a primary goal of the study, and I'll go over the details of that in a minute. But so we want the patients to be clear on what we're really looking at in the study, the goals. If they don't want to do this, what their alternatives are, that's a discussion with their doctor. We want to make sure it's safe to proceed, so we put them through some tests, and we look at their tests and their lab results, and maybe even EKGs and echoes, things that we can do to make sure that everything we do for them, we can evaluate risk versus benefit before we put them on. And then we talk to them about the length of the study. Is this a study that they're going to be on and get 6 treatments and be done? Or is this a study that's going to go on for potentially years, and even after they're off the treatment, maybe we're going to call them every so often to see how they're doing. So all of that information we want to make sure they're clear on before they sign the paperwork. So it's a really good to encourage them to take it home, share it with their family, talk it over with whomever they need to help them make that decision. So as I mentioned, there are 4 phases in clinical trials. Here at Lineberger, we do the first 3. We participate in phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. with phase 1 being first in human, and phase 4 being post-marketing, where there's just more data being collected afterwards, and we don't usually participate in those. Phase 1s may be first in human, so again, we're not looking necessarily at there is a treatment. We're looking at benefit. We want to see how well they do in the efficacy, but that's not usually a primary goal. Often we're looking at safety as a primary goal. So we are wanting to look at how well the body metabolizes the drug, or does it affect the kidneys or the liver. These are usually small numbers of studies, small patient numbers, and small numbers of sites participating. You might only have 1, 2, or 3 sites that are doing the study. We enroll the patients slowly. Usually we do no more than 3 at a time, and we make sure that they're doing well and tolerating their drug, and they usually have to have completed the first cycle before we go up and add more patients and we up the dose. So we're really looking at determining the dose of a drug, side effects, safety profiles. These studies can get really involved, and we can ask patients to come in and spend 12 hours at a time in our outpatient clinic with an extra IV in the arm that we're drawing blood samples off of, or maybe serial EKGs, or frequent vital signs and monitoring. So these can be really involved for our patients, and so we want to make sure that that is clear to them before they sign up for a study that's going to impact their life quite a bit in the beginning. There could be a lot of back and forth, and do they have the transportation? Can they get there? Can they get back? So those kinds of things. Phase 2, we start to look now at how well the drug works. We're still gathering safety information. We're looking at side effects. Usually these are still small studies, but we may have found that, or in preclinical work or in the phase 1s, we've identified that certain disease groups, based on the pathway or the mutation that it seems to be targeting, or there's a reason that we want to put it into certain patient populations. And so often in phase 2, we start to look at certain specific disease groups. And we usually will expand the number of sites that are involved in the study, but there's still relatively small numbers of patients. Phase 3 is where these are really large studies. You can have hundreds or thousands of patients. They can be locally here within the U.S., or they could be nationally and internationally. They usually are internationally. If it's a pharmaceutical company, they are looking at this to add lots of patients, because they really want to now look at comparing the standard of care drug as it currently is for a disease group with their new drug to see if it's more effective. These are usually and often randomized trials. Sometimes it's a placebo trial, and that's where patients get a little bit nervous. Usually if it's a placebo trial, it's because there's not necessarily a standard of care drug to compare it to, but you do run into some placebo double-blinded studies where even the pharmacist does not know what drug the patients are getting. So sometimes it's important to help your patients understand and feel okay if this is what they're going to do. And if it's not a placebo, it's a standard of drug versus a study drug, well then, either way, I think that they're getting, they have a really good chance of some benefit, because it's either standard of care, which we already know works, or we've got a drug that's reached phase 3 studies and it's being compared to the standard, so there is some signs that it works as well, if not better than, what's already standard of care. So, these are large numbers of studies, because this is the information that they're going to be gathering to send to the FDA. And then, as I mentioned, phase 4 is post-marketing. Usually they're looking at long-term effects of a drug after it's been approved. I've listed here an example of a time when phase 4 trial really did come into play in determining with the decision to withdraw bevacizumab for breast cancer. It was initially approved, and then some studies came out to show that it was not effective, and so it was withdrawn as an FDA-approved drug for breast cancer. Still, they're out for others, but not for breast cancer anymore. So how do your patients benefit? I think when you're looking at early trials, your patients have the opportunity to be one of the first to receive a new drug. And we don't always know the outcome. We can't make any guarantees, and we tell them that up front. But if this is a new class of drug, then your patients their tumors have never seen this class of drug, which means that might increase the opportunity for some response. Even a partial response might be better than what they've been receiving with their standard of care drug. For later drugs, as I mentioned, later trials, they're going to usually get, if it's a randomized trial, at worst case, they get standard of care drug, and if not, they're getting the other drug that's been showing benefit. For some patients, they understand that this may not help them, but they also, I've had so many patients say to me, well, even if it doesn't help me, someone could get some benefit from it. So they're looking at how can they help future cancer patients. So much more of an altruistic reason for participating. I shouldn't be, but I was shocked by how many patients used to say that to me. They really, really wanted to be able to give back. And then the unintended side effect of all of this, the benefit really, is that when they're on a clinical trial, not only do they have you as their nurses and their healthcare providers to speak to, they have a direct line to their coordinators. And our study coordinators have business cards. Our patients are given the phone number, and during the workday, they have a way to reach their coordinator with any questions or problems. And if they need something and they don't know where to start, they'll start with their coordinators, and then we can help them, direct them if there's somebody else they need to be speaking with. But it's like an extra line of care provider, just because there's someone that can help them get their answers that they need while they're being treated on a clinical trial. There, of course, are no guarantees with clinical trials. We don't know if these are new drugs. We don't necessarily know their side effects. We don't know. There may be some surprises. We think we've seen, certain side effects in preclinical work, and maybe if there's a phase 1 trial, we've seen some side effects in that. Now they're in a phase 2. There could be some side effects we didn't know about or had not witnessed before suddenly appear. So, there is a level of unknown here, but we really watch them closely. And again, that's why they have that direct line to their coordinator. So if they have a symptom that they're experiencing that they feel like could be related to the study, or if they don't know, they have someone they can call to help them with that. But again, there are no guarantees. We tell them that up front. All of our consents tell them that they may not get benefit. We want them to understand fully what they're about to sign up for. One of the unfortunate things is that healthcare insurance does not cover the costs that are associated with clinical trials. There's a lot of financial risk that our patients can be put in, and so I've got some more information on that. But I really encourage all of our patients to talk to their insurance companies before they sign up for something, because of we're talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of care, depending on the drugs that might be part of the treatment that are considered routine and not part of the study. And then, there's the inconvenience factor. They could be driving 3 hours once a week, twice a week. Maybe we were asking them to spend the night because they've got 12 hours of blood draws and they have to come back in the morning for a 24-hour time point. They have kids at home. They want to get them off to school in the morning. Now they have to worry about daycare so that someone can take care of them while they're here. Do I have someone to drive me? What about gas money? It's a 3-hour drive. I don't have the money to get here and fill my gas tank up. So those are the things that they have to consider, and it's really helpful if you can help them as well. We have the same discussion, but sometimes they don't hear it all on the first pass, just because it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming. These are things for them to consider. If your patient is interested in a trial, ultimately it's the physician that has to help drive this. So I always encourage them to talk to their doctors. If we get a patient that calls kind of like a cold call, they call us and they have cancer, their mother has cancer, their brother has cancer, they may call and say, I'm looking for a trial with colon cancer and I found this one, can you help me? We'll give them some information, but we also encourage them to take that information to their own oncologist, because we don't want to take that oncologist out of the loop. It's important that they stay a part of the team and are looped in the entire time the patients are coming to wherever they're traveling to for their clinical trials. So we always encourage them to speak with their providers before they make that big leap. For a lot of you, you said on the survey at the beginning that you're taking care of patients with clinical trials. So that's great. They could be participating in one locally there where you are, or they also may have been referred to an outside facility and maybe you're seeing them in between times. Those are great options. Your doctors may be referring them to us, or they may have their own trials there locally that they're working on. But the other way they can look is on clinicaltrials.gov. There are search options there for patients where they can just click in colon cancer and North Carolina, and it'll pop up every study in North Carolina that treats that disease. So there's some ways they can go in and start kind of searching on their own and then take that information back to their doctor. They can also do this advanced search, and I just did a quick screenshot here. You can see how detailed it is. you can plug in a lot of information and get very specific about the information you're looking for. If you look at the top where it says search terms, you could put colon cancer there, and at the very bottom of that page it says state, and you can say North Carolina, but there are a lot of other options looking at age. What's not on the screenshot is you can pick the phase of the trial. Maybe your patient doesn't want to do phase 1. They're more comfortable with phase 2 and 3 trials, but you can select phase 2 and 3 and only search on those trials. So there's a lot of options, and I think this page also at the very bottom says you can select that you only want to participate in trials that have shown some benefit or clinical response. So it's a very detailed search, and you can help them with this, or you can give them the website and they can do it themselves. But it's a nice little way to quickly try and find something that's local. The studies that come up, your patients can click on them, and it will give you a contact name. It will give you some information on the study, the eligibility, and a contact name, someone to call to get additional information. So it's a nice way to search if there's nothing immediately available in your local area or at your institution, but your patient wants to look for something different. Who can join the study? As I mentioned earlier, we do some testing up on the front end. We want to make sure that it's safe for a patient to proceed. Typically, our patients have to be in relatively good health to be on a clinical trial, because we are looking at the risks and the benefits. We have to worry about how it's going to be metabolized and if it's going to be cleared through the body. So our patients go through a lot of testing, labs, scans, maybe echoes, or we might have to look at the heart, EKGs, lots of testing. Some of our studies have the potential for some eye side effects, so we send them to an ophthalmologist. All of that has to be done up front before they're started on study. And then, of course, we want to make sure that any and all questions have been answered before we start. As I mentioned, costs can be horrific and detrimental to our patients. So please encourage your patients to look at their insurance and call their insurance before they get too involved in this. They're not free. I wish they were, but they're not, and there's a lot of charges, and it can be difficult for a patient to understand what their responsibility is for payment and what is covered by a study. And there's two kinds of charges. There's routine charges, which are if a patient wasn't going on study, these are the charges that they would get regardless of their treatment. The clinic visit with the doctor, the lab work. And then there are the research costs. So maybe they're coming in every 3 weeks for a treatment for a study drug, but they're getting an exam. Well, the exam is probably going to be routine. The lab work is probably going to be routine, except for maybe there's some unique labs that this drug maybe affects thyroid, so we may add a thyroid panel that's covered by the study. So they have to be really clear on the cost. And it says in our consent, it tells them that they're responsible for the routine costs, and this still trips them up. So it's one of those conversations that never hurts to repeat, and make sure that your patients are clear on this. If they ask any questions about this, encourage them to speak to their insurance and to call their study coordinator so that they can be clear on the cost. By federal law, insurance companies are required to cover routine costs even on a study, but they are not required to cover the study-related charges. And so this is where it gets a little sticky because patients don't understand that. They don't understand what is routine and what is not. And then I've listed here some of the requirements for insurance companies. For patients that are on Medicare, there's a link here that can take you to some information about national coverage, but Medicare does cover clinical trials, payment for routine patient care costs, and they'll cover the cost due to medical complications associated with participation in clinical trials. TRICARE, I've actually had patients get denied for phase 1 trials through TRICARE. So I would encourage them, this is through the Department of Defense, to really make sure they reach out to their insurance company. I think a lot of times they have like a care manager or a case manager there that they can speak with so that they can be clear on what's covered so that there's no surprises a few months down the road. And then the Veterans Affairs, they'll cover NCI-sponsored trials if they're done at the Veterans Administration Medical Centers. Okay, so if they show up in a different facility, be sure that it's covered because it may not be. For patients that are on study, it's really helpful for us as coordinators we have to keep track of their medications. We have to be careful, and sometimes we don't know that the doctor just gave a prescription to the patient for something that could actually be prohibited on the study. So if you're with a patient and you know that the doctor is prescribing, or your patient's about to get prescribed something, remind either the doctor or your patient, or you can reach out to the coordinator and ask them to check the study and make sure that it is allowed on the study. It might be that your doctor might need to prescribe a different kind of medicine that is allowed. We try to inform our patients, but it's hard for them to remember what they're allowed to take and what they're not. So, if you know they're on a study, it's helpful to ask the question before they're picking up a prescription. Do you know what meds you're allowed to take, or what kind of meds you aren't allowed to take, so that they can it makes them kind of think that maybe I should call my study coordinator before I start my pills, my new prescription. Diet is another thing. If they're on an oral med, sometimes there are certain foods and beverages that they can't take because of the way it affects the medication that they're on. And I've listed just a couple of here. These are the more common ones that I see in a lot of our pill studies. No grapefruit, no Seville oranges. For those of you that aren't familiar with Seville oranges, I was told recently that's what they use to make orange marmalade. So if you're an orange marmalade fan, then that's something you'd want to keep in mind. Toxicities. These are the side effects that come from the drugs, and our patients, they're asked every time they come into the clinic by the coordinators, what is it, how are you feeling, what are you doing, what are your symptoms, when did they start, when did they stop? Some patients are reluctant or afraid to tell us because they're afraid that if they say, well, I got really sick and spent 3 days in bed, they're worried we're going to take them off study. And so they may tell you this, and it's important that we know this because it's a safety thing for them. It might not be that they have to come on study. We need to hold their drug for a little while, and the protocol will direct that. It'll tell us whether we can hold it. Maybe we have to dose reduce it, but maybe it was just too strong and we need to go down a little bit. But we can't do that, and we can't help them if we don't know. So it's really important that if they share this with you, that you either relate it to the physician or let the coordinator know so that we can make sure that we keep them safe. The other thing is to document what they tell you. When a coordinator walks into the room and then leaves, and the doctor walks into the room and leaves, we compare their notes later, and there are differences because the patients tell them different things. They may forget to tell the doctor what they told, a couple of the symptoms that they shared with the coordinator, and I suspect it's the same with you as nurses and healthcare providers that they have developed trusting relationships with. So, document any symptoms or anything that they're talking about. If they say, oh, I started on something last week for an infection, a sinus infection, let us know that. Document it. If they're going to be scheduled for any kind of procedures, and you know that they're on a study, ask them if the coordinator or the doctor has mentioned to them whether there needs to be any special actions taken on their part. Maybe we need to hold the drug for a number of days, or before or after. And the patient, if he doesn't know that, at least reach out to the coordinator or the physician and make sure that, again, that those questions are asked just to protect your patient. And, I've mentioned a couple times today that not only protecting the patient, but also the data and the quality of the data. For a lot of our patients, especially when phase 1, I mentioned that we may have a patient that comes in for 12 hours of blood samples. It's important if we ask them to be drawn, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes after an infusion, and the window plus or minus is only 2 minutes. If it's a 5 minute, if it takes 5 extra minutes to draw it because you're busy with another patient, that's okay, but we have to know that. Otherwise, it impacts the integrity of the data. So just make sure that any delays are recorded, so that we can justify those discrepancies. If the drug has to go over 90 minutes and it took 110 minutes, we need to report that. So please let us know those kinds of things, so that we can, again, for the data integrity, be able to explain any discrepancies in the results that they're finding. So we just need to know about it. So it's just about open communication. And then finally, I've been doing clinical trials for 11 and a half years here at Lineberger, and I was a research phase 1 nurse for 7. And so I started here in 2005, and I tried to go through, I'm sure that I've not got, this is not an inclusive list, but I tried to list some of the drugs that I have been here to see get approved that we had worked on, and it's been really exciting. I think about, like, for melanoma and the ipilimumab, Yervoy, we were fortunate enough to give one of the first patients, first in human drugs, this study drug, and he only got one dose, but he got such a great benefit that for a number of years I know for sure that he was in a complete response after one treatment. I don't know the status of him anymore, but I mean, it's exciting when you can see that, and it's not something we see enough. I wish we saw it more, but I think that as the last few years we are seeing more and more benefit. Our patients are getting at least partial responses, if not complete responses, and extended, I think it's extending their lives. And so this is a really interesting field because I get to watch these drugs go from first in human to FDA approved and benefiting our patients every day, and it's just fascinating. So here's some of the studies, there's some of the meds, and then I continue it here. So these are just a few. Like I said, this is not inclusive, and chances are I've probably left a few off. And finally, I listed some clinical trials websites just for references that you might want to look at if you're interested. Clinicaltrials.gov, as I mentioned, is a great one for your patients to go to find clinical trials that they may want to look for if they're running out of treatment options or if they just want to go a different way. This will help them get started. Cancer.gov is another great website. The Lineberger website is really helpful if you're looking for a specific one locally that you want to look for. Some of our sites, we have multi-center here, and some of our other affiliates within the state are also running some of these trials, so it doesn't have to be that they have to travel here. It might be something that's open right down the road from where you are or even at your facility. And then finally, cancer.net was one that I stumbled upon as I was looking, and this is information where they try to update just information that's current from some of the talks and things at ASCO. All right. Well, that's the end of my presentation. I hope that there was something there that was helpful and beneficial for you.
Well, Kim, thank you very much. That was definitely a comprehensive overview, and I really like the focus that you placed on those that may be caring directly for patients and the trusted relationship and how valuable that can be in collecting information, and also educating patients about the possibilities that are available with clinical trials. We are going to give the opportunity to answer or ask questions. So in just a second, we should have some information that pops up here on the screen. And if you used Poll Everywhere at the beginning of our presentation, to respond to our poll, you do not have to text UNCCN to 22333 again because you're already kind of in the room to respond here. But if you did not respond and would like to ask a question, I would ask that you please text the letters UNCCN to the number 22333. And you will receive a confirmation letter that you or message that you've joined the poll, and from there you can just start texting in your questions, and hopefully in a few seconds we'll have some questions that pop up. While we're waiting, actually one just popped up for us, so we'll go ahead and try to address that. It says, what are some strategies to address the patient's distrust of the healthcare industry, especially in vulnerable populations?
That's a good question. You know, as I mentioned, it's really about building trust, and we are careful. We here at UNC, we've kind of said we are not going to enroll certain populations like prisoners, you know, because of they've been identified as a vulnerable population. I think when it comes to strategies otherwise, I think that's why it's so important that as healthcare providers and nurses and health professionals in the clinics working with your patients, you've developed relationships already, and they may come to you to see what you think or to ask you questions. You know, the coordinator that just came in and talked to me about that study said this. What do you know about it? And so this is where I think it's so important that we engage as a team and collaborate. And you know, these are our patients, not mine or yours, and to help kind of break down those walls and those barriers. We have here we have a Spanish interpreter in our group as well, who works directly with all of our Spanish-speaking patients, and they have a direct line to him, so that when they have questions, they can call him. When he is not working with patients directly in the clinic because of, you know, he's not needed for translating, he is circulating out in our waiting room, talking to patients to help them understand the process, and already trying to develop and build relationships so that they can when they come into the clinic, he tells them, well, your doctor may or may not talk to you about a clinical trial, but if they do, you and I will be working more closely together. Here's who I am. Here's what I can do for you. So I think it's building some relationships beforehand as well, and then it's just kind of following through. If you say you're going to do something, that you do, and kind of commit to that from the beginning, that you're going to be able to walk them through the entire process and make sure that they're comfortable. I mean, the bottom line is that if they're a vulnerable population and they have hesitations and concerns that you can't make them feel better about, then chances are they may not be a good patient for a trial. I think you just have to kind of think about that up front and talk to the doctor about that.
Okay, it looks like we've had several other questions roll in, so we'll move right on to the next one. Do you have a financial counselor specifically assigned to clinical trials to help patients navigate complex insurance?
We don't. The cancer hospital has a couple of financial counselors, and we refer them to them directly because of the complexity of it, and there's a lot of routine care costs. We have them speak to financial counselors here in the cancer hospital, and if we have any questions, we've reached out to them as well to talk to them about a specific case. But we do encourage them to talk to them before they go on study if they have any concerns, and it's just, because of the cost, it's just scary. So and I've had patients come off study because they can't afford it. So I wish we did, but we don't.
Okay, and I guess I thought of an add-on maybe to that question. You mentioned with government programs such as Medicare and the Veterans Assistance Program, are there typically third-party or commercial assistance programs that provide financial assistance to patients that may be considering clinical trials?
I don't know of any that would provide large quantities. Sometimes, like through the American Cancer Society, you can get small, assistance. I think I've heard that they'll give you money for gas or something. I don't know if anybody else knows of any that are out there. I would love to hear from you, but I don't know of any third party. Some of our sponsored studies, because they're early phase, we've had some luck with some of our sponsors at covering more of the clinical trial than you would expect.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, ultimately, unfortunately, it falls back to the patient. So it's an important part of the discussion to have before they're enrolled.
Okay. And speaking of enrollment, our next question says, what additional strategies do you suggest in order to increase subject enrollment?
Well, I think it's about education, and it's reaching out to sites, and I'm hoping that as UNC has started to partner more with some of our local community hospitals, and I'm hoping that talks like this will help as well, to help just put clinical trials out there on the radar and know that they're an option. I would love to make it more accessible for patients in the community settings and not have to ask them to drive 4 or 5 hours. I had patients when I was seeing patients that they were eligible, they were great candidates, but they couldn't come 5 hours every week to drive here and back. It's a 10-hour round trip. So I would love to get out more and get these studies into the community settings closer to home where our patients don't have to travel. We have a multi-center network that can help us with coordinating from here, as long as there's a research person in the facility that can help from the other side. So I'm hoping that we can get the word out more and more, and you guys are kind of can help with that.
And I think we have a comment that was submitted that kind of has a strategy too. It says, I think a very important point is that patients enrolled in clinical trials are followed more closely than patients receiving routine care. So that could possibly be reviewed as a strategy to help.
That's right. Good point.
Our next question is, what are you doing to market trials with external oncology sites?
Well, we're trying to figure that out. We used to have some letters that would go out to the different disease groups, and I don't think we do that anymore. And so this is something that we're still trying to kind of figure out, and we've had a couple of discussions. It's been a little while. That's kind of been put on the back burner, but I think it's something that we need to talk about. Because like I said, you can do them in your own facilities if you're set up and you've got the ability to do it, but you've got to know about them first. And so we're trying to figure out what's the right mix. I mean, right now it's just the relationships of our physicians. If you have a patient in the western part of the state that needs a clinical trial, that physician will pick up the phone and call someone they know here in that group, in that disease group. And so it's the physician relationships right now that are helping us to make patients aware of clinical trials just by word of mouth between two physicians discussing and then having a referral. But I would love, again, to be able to do it more so that they're not having to travel so much. So this is something we're trying to figure out what the best way to do this is. I don't have a good answer right now.
And our last comment says it would be interesting to understand why it is that pediatric patients are enrolled on clinical trials at a much higher rate than adults, 60 to 75% from some of those statistics you presented. And there, I think probably question got cut off with the character limit of Pole Everywhere. But do you have anything you'd like to speak to that point about children being enrolled at higher rates?
I don't know the answer to that. When we don't do a lot with pediatrics. The trials that we have done this for, it's only been a couple. You're talking directly to the parents, and the parents are, I think, just willing to do whatever it takes to take care of their kids. If my son, or I have two kids, and if I had someone come up to me and say, we have this really great trial, and that they've got a really bad disease, I think that I would be really quick to jump on it if I had all of my information and felt safe, that it was safe to proceed, and I had a doctor that I trusted telling me that this was the best thing for my child. I think it's a little bit harder when it's an adult that's making the decision themselves, and they have some preconceived ideas of healthcare. And someone mentioned some of the, that concern about vulnerability. So I think it's maybe a different perspective. But I don't know for sure, and I would love it if anybody else has any other ideas. I think we need to figure it out so that we can improve our rates, definitely.
Okay. And kind of as a follow-up to that question, you spoke about some, in the beginning of your presentation, about some studies have to close because there's not enough accrual. Mm-hmm. Do you see a specific disease area or specific patient population that tends to be consistently problematic with getting accruals?
I don't think that I can think of one specific disease group. I think we try to be realistic when we're looking at enrollment numbers, and I'm not even thinking about here at our site. It could be a national study that's not doing well, and when that happens, the collective we, those that are participating in the study nationally, will look at that study and try and figure it out. I've seen a sponsor actually have an investigator meeting in the middle of a study when it's been open a year and a half and enrollment is down to try and figure it out. But it is a challenge, and financially, even if you're not enrolling, there's a lot of behind the scenes things that have to happen annually, the renewals and a lot of regulatory and work. So it does cost us effort and resources to keep those kinds of trials open. And then we're putting our resources on trials that we really don't need to put them on, when we'd rather direct them to a high enrolling study where our patients can benefit more.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for those questions you submitted. I do, before we close out today, want to go over a few other announcements. So first of all, we'd like to say thank you to the state of North Carolina, the state legislature, through their generous funding through the University Cancer Research Fund, which makes this program possible, and also the support of the UNC Lineberg Comprehensive Cancer Center, along with the members of the UNC Cancer Network telehealth team, which are made up of Tim Poe, the director, Mary King, the operational coordinator, and Veneranda Bure, who is our newest team member, who's our AV support engineer. I'd also like to remind you about our upcoming lectures. We do have a Community Lunch and Learn lecture, which is taking place next Friday, May 19th. This is a little bit different date. Normally, Community Lunch and Learn lectures fall on the fourth Friday, but because of the Memorial Day holiday, we've moved this up to actually take place next Friday, May 19th. And the title of that lecture will be Melanoma Early Detection and Therapeutic Progress. Dr. David O'Lillo will be one of the speakers, along with Andrea Snyder. And because of the content of this lecture, and also because of Andrea being one of our speakers, she will actually speak to how people in the cosmetology profession can help with screening for melanoma. And because of the content of that lecture, we'll also be offering for eligible participants a certificate for 1 hour of CE credit through the North Carolina Board of Cosmetic Art Examiners. Our next professional telehealth lecture will take place on May 24th. Dr. Ethan Bosch will be talking about the impact of patient-reported outcomes on patient care. And our next RN and Allied Health lecture will take place on June 14th. where we'll have two nurse navigators from North Carolina Cancer Hospital, Amy Depew and Jacqueline Webb, and they'll talk with us about the power of teamwork and navigating patients with complex needs. We'll hope that you'll be able to join us for any of those that you find would be of interest to you. And with that, I would like to close out by again thanking Kim for being with us today and sharing some great information. And also to all of you out there that are nurses, I'd like to wish you a happy National Nurses Week. And personally thank you for all that you do each and every day for the patients that you care for, their families, and for your community. And with that, I thank you very much, and I hope you have a very nice day. See you next time.